All right, so welcome everybody to the Noteworthy Narrators panel. Thank you so much for taking your time to be here this evening. It's really great that we can have this sort of event, especially in light of us all being socially distanced and everything. Before I introduce the panelists, I'll share my screen here. I did want to mention I guess, some of the background behind this event. So this is through the Newark Public Library, and one of the things that we were discussing in this time of us being closed to the public but still trying to offer services online, we've been really trying to encourage patrons to use our online resources, including Libby and Overdrive. Those are kind of the same thing, and eLibrary NJ. And so that's where people can get access to audiobooks and ebooks. So in addition to highlighting those resources more on our website, I thought it would be a good idea to feature the talent behind a lot of the behind audiobooks, because sometimes oftentimes what makes audiobooks worth listening to isn't just the story itself. It's also the the performance behind it. So just before we get into the actual discussion and our panelists, I did want to show to those of us who are here in Newark, in order to access audiobooks and ebooks at the Newark Public Library. You can, if you are using your computer, your desktop or your laptop computer, you can go to elibrarynj.com. If you are using your smartphone, you can use the Libby app. They both feature the same collection, and you would log in using your Newark Public Library library card. If you don't have one, or if you think you may need to renew it, you can visit npl.org/library card, and you can fill out the form there. People who are eligible for Newark Public Library cards are those who live, work, go to school, or own property in Newark. If you're not sure what to borrow, we have book lists that we have been starting to create, including a Black Lives Matter book list, which you can access here. If you are unsure how to use eLibrary NJ, Libby, Overdrive, any of that, this page here, npl.org/collections-services, /ebooks-and-audiobooks, has a written tutorial as well as a video that was done by one of my colleagues in the reference department. And if you are interested, if you need more of like an in-person, or not in-person, but of course, if you need more of a live back and forth for figuring out this service, or suggestions for what to read next, you can always contact the reference department at reference@npl.org, or call us at 973-733-7779. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I will introduce our panelists. So, Kristin Meinzer is a podcaster whose many shows include By the Book and Movie Therapy. She is the author and narrator of 2 audiobooks. These are So You Want to Start a Podcast, which came out last year, and How to Be Fine, which she co-authored with Jolenta Greenberg, which came out this March. Her first audiobook won the 2020 Audio Award for Best Business/Personal Development Narration. Elizabeth Burns is the head of Reader Services at the New Jersey State Library Talking Book and Braille Center, or TBBC. Liz has presented at the American Library Association, the Public Library Association, and the New Jersey Library Association. Currently, she is serving on the 2021 Newbery Award Selection Committee. She served on the 2018 committee for the Odyssey Award for Excellence in Audiobook Production. And finally, Karl O'Brien is a Jamaican-born actor, playwright, producer, and educator at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. He has shared the stage with Harry Belafonte and the late historian and activist Howard Zinn, and pursues artistic projects that interrogate socio-political issues, especially those intersecting with Caribbean culture, queerness, and immigration. He is the narrator of the novel These Ghosts Are Family by Maisy, who is a librarian here at the Newark Public Library. And I want to particularly thank Maisy for getting me in touch with Mr. Williams. So I guess I can go ahead and start with my first question. So this is a question for everybody. What is it like to work in a team to produce an audiobook or a talking book? The narrator is typically the only person the listener hears when they're listening to an audiobook, but anytime you listen to the whole book through, and sometimes even at the beginning, they'll list credits and say, here are all the people who made this possible. So there are a lot of collaborators behind the scenes. And how are different narration decisions made?
Well, I can say for myself, in a certain sense, it's kind of lonely because, sitting alone in a booth with just a tablet in front of you with the book. The book is actually usually on a tablet, so you don't have to hit forward or anything. You can just scroll with your finger when you're recording, because they want to set it up so that it's as simple as possible. And you're just alone in a studio room with a glass of water. Sometimes in my case, because my stomach is very talkative, they gave me what they called a stomach pillow, because the mics are very strong and they would pick up the sound of my stomach talking all the time. And also, a little known fact is that when you're narrating an audiobook, there's also a high likelihood of burping a lot because there's so much taking of breaths. And so one thing I think is really interesting about working with the team is when I first sat down with the team, they explained these things to me. They said, you're going to burp a lot. We brought you a stomach pillow just in case. And they just explained the lay of the land, which I thought was great, because if I just walked in there and didn't know any of those things, I would have felt very self-conscious about my burping and my stomach and so on. So having a team that was supportive made it really easy. And then also my director has directed a lot of audiobooks with great people. She's an award-winning audiobook director. She worked with Tom Hanks on The Dutch House with Anne Patchett, for example. But she's very skilled at being firm but kind, which I'm grateful for. So she would say, you slurred those words together. You said this instead of the. And just having her in my ear, even though I was alone in a room, hearing her voice, give me that direction, made it easy, because she had such a great way about her. I don't know what the rest of you, how, your directors have been now.
For TVBC, we get the books, NLS. We are part of, we provide services in New Jersey for the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled down in Washington, D.C. And NLS are the ones who produce the audiobooks. But I know one thing, because you're saying in terms of the decisions made, I know one of the decisions NLS always has to make when they're figuring out their schedule of what to record and when is narrators. People have favorite narrators. Like there's people who they love that narrator so much that the book that they didn't think they would like, they'll listen to over and over again because of that narrator. Well, because of that, they also want to have the same narrator be for an entire series. So sometimes just the behind the action stuff going on of trying to make all the timing right for things to come out is, you have this book, here's when it's coming out. Can you get the narrator that you need because they did the other 2 or 3 in the series available for them? So that's a detail that sometimes people really don't realize has to be considered with what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to endorse what you just said, but I'm definitely with Kristen on this whole thing with the stomach growls and all of that. The team I worked with, that's when you know it's just not you alone. That has to have make this thing happen, right? The engineer was fantastic, Brian and Kat. Brian was my director, Kat was my engineer. And I'll tell you, they are, what you said, hard, firm, honest, but it was a great time. Honestly, it was just a fantastic time working with the team, and you need them. You really can't do it alone. People do it alone, but I prefer to have people checking me and letting me know, okay, this was said incorrectly. And you think that you're so articulate and you have it all together, but they pick up every single thing, which is very important. And you know, I can't thank them enough.
Awesome, thank you. And actually, before I continue with the pre-written questions, I do want to mention to attendees that you can feel free to ask a question in the Q&A section. We'll be leaving time at the end for that. This question is for Liz. So you're at the Talking Book and Braille Center, the TBBC. How is what the TBBC offers different from a typical public library's audiobook collection?
TBBC has audio like a public library, but our audience is specialized. In order to qualify for our services, you have to be what the National Library Service calls print disabled, which means that for a physical reason or a vision reason, you can't read traditional print. And for low vision, that just simply means the print in the newspaper is now too small to read. So, and for our library, you can, it can be reading disabilities. It can be right now, recently, we've had a lot of kids and young adults with concussions who are qualifying for our services. But the majority of our folks are, I think 70% are age 75 and over. And the reason they come to our library is age-related issues with their eyes. You know, that their vision is going as they get older. And so we like to say it's for folks who need audio as opposed to folks who just like to listen to audio. And the origins of the library go back 90 years now to the early 30s. There was the realization that folks who need, well, first of all, in the 1930s really didn't have audiobooks. So there was, you know, literally recognizing that there was a need for this and creating the need. I think the commercial audiobook market started more like in the 50s, some of the earliest imprints. And so they've been recording and setting standards for like decades. So it's for the folks who need it. And because of that, because the need was recognized that, you know, if you wanted to just go in and buy a print book, you can get things on sale, and from the library, you don't have it for that. There's certain exceptions to the copyright law that make it easier for us to record for folks who are print disabled, as they say. And with those limitations, we want to always make sure that it's for the folks who need it, not want it, because the folks who want it, they can go to the public library. Because of that, we also will record items that you can't find elsewhere. Like, so the books that Karl and Kristen have recorded, you can get those at the public library. You might be able to get them from our library too, but there's other books sometimes, frequently like gardening books, cooking books, a lot of kids books, or mid-list or older titles that you can't get in the public library that you can get from us. And so that just makes things more accessible for those folks. It's the type of thing that we wish more people knew about it, but the people who do use it are the services. It's very meaningful for them, because especially a lot of them are at a place in their life where they had read for years and now they can't, and we give that back to them.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. My next question is for everyone, kind of in light of that, I guess, discussion of accessibility. How are regional or national accents handled in the audiobook industry? Are accents besides the standard US accent seen as an obstacle to accessibility? are there situations where you are asked to tone accents up or down? I'm thinking in particular, Kristen, you have a very specific Midwestern accent, and Karl, you are Jamaican. So I'm wondering if there are certain situations where that comes into play.
Well, I can say for myself that there are certain words that I pronounce with Minnesotans. We love our vowels, and there are certain words where you're going to hear the vowels real good there, and it's gonna come out real strong with those O's, especially. Yeah, and so there are certain points that maybe a word that I think I'm pronouncing in the clearest possible way, maybe I'm pronouncing a little too clearly, and that maybe the pronunciation might be a little bit off for some ears, but with my books, since I wrote them myself and I narrated them myself, it's acceptable for me to have the accent that I do. However, you know, that's different than other books out there. One of my friends who is an audiobook narrator, she doesn't get cast to read certain kinds of books. She'll get cast to read things like Amish romances, but she won't be cast to read books that are supposed to sound like, you know, a mystery at the White House. You know, she won't be reading those kinds of books. So, you know, it's like film acting or stage acting to a certain extent. If your accent doesn't match, it might not, you know, it might be the case that people will not want to cast you. But I'm curious about what Karl has to say about this, because he actually is an actor.
Yeah, and it's been a thing throughout my life. Once I decided to be an artist, once I decided to act, you have to go with it. If it's Shakespeare, it's usually not a problem to just speak in my regular Jamaican accent, because somehow the lilt lends itself to the language better. I've heard this. Some directors have told me that. For this particular book, what was interesting was that it, you know, the accents were so many and varied. I mean, you're looking at characters that span the UK, Jamaica, and certain parts of the United States, mainly New York. So it was great. So my accent was not a hindrance. As a matter of fact, it got me working all the various kinds of Jamaican accents from different parishes and socioeconomic backgrounds, and got into that kind of work. But the other thing is, before, this is the second book I've done fully. My first book was a Jamaican textbook for the Caribbean Examination Council. So that was a whole different thing. So the accent needed to sound crisp. And Jamaica was formerly a British colony. So when you're talking about differences, you'll hear it when I speak. And we were kind of brought up, I was one of those generations that, you know, brought up to speak proper English, speak the Queen's English. So there are times when I'm here, you know, it's a difference between potato type of thing. And then it has to be now, whoever I'm working for, what is the house style? If it's media, okay, how do you want this pronounced, right? So every now and again, you know, Brian would check with Simon & Schuster as to, okay, what is the pronunciation here that you want? Because I'll say something that I've probably been brought up to speak in a particular way, but then you get into the booth and the writer may want it said a certain way, different people might want it said a certain way, and definitely if you're doing theater, your director or the script playwright might have a certain way of which they need certain things to sound. So if you're doing a Raise in the Sun, you're Asa Guy, right? If you're Walter Lee, you're Walter Lee, and that comes with certain things, you know, when it comes to accents.
Yeah, for the listeners for TVBC, for listening, there's some folks who like accents and some don't. What we get more is because some of our seniors are also beginning to experience hearing loss, that tone can matter. And so that sometimes there's people who begin with saying that they have a preference for or against a male or female narrator, but it really has to do with, is their hearing loss like a high tone hearing loss, which means it's more difficult to understand women's voices, or is it a low tone hearing loss going on? So they're actually, again, it's just more difficult because of their hearing loss to say understand men's voices. And the machine that we lend to people to use to listen to our books actually has a tone button on it, so that like when they'll call and they're saying, oh, I had trouble understanding that, we're like, well, take the tone button and you can put it up or put it lower, and then you can hear what you didn't think you could hear because of that adjustment.
That's really cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, and then Karl, what you were saying about like the different types of Jamaican accents, I think a lot of people don't realize that sort of thing. Like people will say, "Oh, the Jamaican accent," but there's more than one. I remember listening to Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and I wouldn't have known this just by reading the book, but the narrator was able to make distinctions between different types of Nigerian accents as well. So yeah, that's really important to point out.
Yeah, it is a fascinating thing with the accent because it can tell you a lot, and especially somewhere like Jamaica, even though it's so tiny, you don't think, oh, it has 14 parishes, and each of those parishes people sound differently.
Yeah. Okay. So my next question, this is a question that was also asked in the audience. It's again for everyone. For those who want to narrate audiobooks as a career or as a volunteer opportunity, what skills do they need to develop? How does one apply or audition for audiobook narration?
Well, in my own case, I became a narrator because I wrote my own books. So if you want to be an audiobook narrator, just write a book or two and then you can do it. That's one thing you can do. And what I was really surprised by is once I narrated my first book and it won an award, so many agents reached out to me from nowhere. Like I didn't even realize there were agents for audiobook narration, but a number of them reached out to me and said, hey, would you like to sign on with me? You can read audiobooks all the time if you want to. And I haven't done it yet, but I am thinking, maybe I'll hear more from Karl about what it's like to do this professionally and find out that, it's worth signing on for. But so that's the way I got into it, was just by writing an award-winning audiobook and narrating it. But do you have an agent, Karl?
I actually don't.
Oh, okay.
And my foray into audiobook narration is pretty new. Like this one, before These Ghosts Are Family, as I said, I did a book back in 2008, which was a biology textbook, right? And this is someone who called me because she knew me from the theater world in Jamaica. So my advice is, one, if your inclination is theater or film, then you need some sort of training, right? So if you're in a university, if you have that sort of privilege to be in a formal educational setting, do a voice class, do a voice and articulation class. I have never regretted it at all. I got trained by 3 women with excellent broadcast training from in Jamaica, and I never regretted that. And that job, again, it was someone. Even this job, I speak to people all the time, and I know this is hard for the introverts and for the people who do not like to go up to people and do the networking thing or talk a lot. But I always say to my students, don't underestimate the room. Whatever room you're in, a classroom, speak to those people, figure out, because that's how I got this particular job. I haven't even met Maisy yet. I'm dying to meet her because COVID came and just messed that up. All right. But I got this particular assignment through a fellow colleague and Jamaican, Heather Alicia Sims, who's an actress, done fabulous work. And we met each other doing another colleague's work, just in a room, stage reading at Hunter College. Sandra Daly Sharif was finishing up her MFA in playwriting, gathered a wonderful bunch of artists together to read her work. That's how I met Heather. We stayed in touch, and Heather mentioned my name to someone at Simon & Schuster, and then I got a phone call. So I know that sounds like, oh my God, one of those stories again. But that really has been my life in terms of acting, constantly finding out where the actors are, where the plays are, where the playwrights are, where the theater practitioners are, and just getting myself into those rooms, which are not easy to do. So a lot of times you will have to do things that will not pay. But I always say, if you can't read somebody's first draft of anything, in a church basement or in a living room, then I'm not sure you're ready for the next step. Some people have been blessed to get an MFA, get a BFA, MFA, move on to something fantastic, and then never had to beat the pavement. That is not my journey. My journey has been one of reading in all sorts of spaces. I have said no fewer times than I have said yes to people who've asked me to read things for free, and it's turned out that they've passed on my name. But formally, definitely get some vocal work and training. That is key. Whether you're the Cecily Berry type from the UK or you're Kristen Linkletter, whatever it is, or your own, people wherever you come from. Like I did in Jamaica, I didn't meet those names until I left Jamaica. For me, it was Leonie Forbes, Erica Allen, and Alma Makian, people who were grounded in broadcasting, doing radio plays, grounded in speech and drama work.
We often get the question at TBBC, like, oh, do you want people to come in to volunteer to record things? And usually what we need to explain, well, first of all, right now, even before this, because of budget cuts, we really don't have the ability to record a whole book. And people, when they first call, don't realize, I think, how much is involved. How long it takes to actually record a book. And if when we were recording books, we usually did more nonfiction than fiction, because with fiction, you have to have, if you've got 5 or 10 people in that fiction book, you've got to sound like you're 5 or 10 different people. It's a real talent that you have to, as Karl was saying, that you've got to develop. It doesn't just happen. But what we'll direct people to is there are some libraries like ours in different states who do have a lot of volunteers who will come in and maybe will read local news or books of local interest that the National Library isn't going to record. There are, so that's a possibility. NLS, they hire professional recorders and every now to record their books, and every now and then they are looking for new people for that. So you'd need to look at the NLS website, which is www.loc.gov/NLS. And the oh, there's a third point, and now I'm forgetting it. So if it's important, it'll come back later. But just that. As you can even see from me talking, I don't have the voices of the other people here. So I'm doing a lot of ums and thes and things like that. And people don't realize how often you do that. You do need to have that practice and to get it so that when people are listening to the book, they are convinced they're not sitting in their car or in their room or wherever it is, that now they're in that, they're on that castle, they're in that street, they're in that scenario, and that they, at the end, they're convinced that, there are 6 people narrating that book and it was really just one.
And sometimes it might mean taking a job. Like, for instance, I worked with, back in Jamaica Information Service, which was the government, news media entity. And I was a producer. I also carried the tripod when we went out on assignments, but they also needed people to read the news. And it was a short segment, but it was an opportunity. It was a way to break in, right? And other people, they're looking for those opportunities. Even before that, I took a job, at a hotel as an entertainment coordinator. And people might scoff at jobs like that and all-inclusives, depending on what your politics are and how you feel about hotels in the Caribbean. But one of the things is, that's where you get some training, microphone training as well, because they need people to go on, talk to the guests, showtime in the night. So all of these things, it's not, if, as I said, my journey has been a very long one to just this point in getting this audiobook. But I've just found that I've just said yes to things that were close to the things I wanted to do. So I knew that I wanted to be on stage and write, but those opportunities did not present themselves when I was 17 or 18. So I did the closest things, you know, the church play, the school drama club, until you just keep finding out ways of getting closer to the rooms and spaces that can allow you to fulfill whatever dream you have of doing this.
Yeah, and one thing I just want to add to that both Liz and Karl, you both said, as far as like, try a lot of different things. Sometimes the things that you don't realize are going to help you do better as a narrator, you have no idea sometimes. Like my first job after college was working for a nonprofit teaching film and television studies classes over the phone to disabled and elderly people, probably many of the same people who go to you, Liz, for what you have. And it wasn't the job I wanted. I had no idea, though, that I would develop certain skills there about sounding warm, about touching people's hearts, that it's more important to be animated and to be excited when you're talking to people than it is to, in some cases, be, you know, have the most precise accent, for example, in some cases. But that's a lot of, you know, practice that I got from that. And I never thought it would help me later on in life. But it really does, you know, when you have to present to people week after week for an hour and make them feel like they matter and be excited. Those are skills that help you later when you're on a microphone.
Wonderful, thank you. So to those of you who are just joining in, I do want to remind folks of the question and answer feature, so you can feel free to add in your own questions, because we'll be taking questions from the audience at the end. But for now, I'll move on to questions for each individual person, but I'll be kind of jumping around. So kind of going back to Liz's point about having to sound like different people in a book. This is a question for Karl. What techniques do you use to differentiate between various character voices and the narrator voice, since the book that you read was a work of fiction?
Well, without not trying to sound too much like a teacher, you got to read, research, find out where these people are from, right? So that helps a whole lot. I think sometimes the big surprise was, you know, there's a character that comes from Scotland, and I was just like, oh my goodness, I am going to butcher this accent. But then you call upon training that you've received before. You call upon all that breath technique that you have. You think about pitch, you think about register, you think about, and sometimes it's not about, I found, not because it's a voice, a female identified voice, that, oh, we're going to go high with that, not necessarily. And it's the same thing with a male voice, right? How many men have some rich bass or baritone in their voice? Not as many as you know or would like to know, right? So you have to think, and how are you going to shade them all? So I think about how many characters are in this particular chapter, and are they all speaking together? And if they're all speaking together, and are they all coming from the same place? Like in one particular part of the text, there are a number of women holding down another woman, trying to get the devil out of her. But one identifies as Catholic, the others don't. And so I've been raised Roman Catholic. So you know, sometimes you call upon people. So if you're a good practitioner, some actors know that they just, you know, you can, all these different styles, whether you want to Stanislavski the thing, or you want to Meisner the thing, or however you want to do it, whatever techniques you want to call upon. I think research is key, and just having a good, being a good observer as well, and a good listener, listening out for sounds, and having an idea, and having an imagination, which is why we love books. Those people who love them, right? Your imagination runs wild, and having some fun. So for me, I think I started out with the premise. I was just so excited to give voice to this Jamaican novel, and I thought this is a great opportunity for me to showcase the length and breadth of voices and characters that are from a place that I was born. So I think I approached it from that angle, and therefore I was excited to just try and pull from my arsenal, which would then have been everything I grew up with from childhood, and listening to people, whether it's in a bus or a car or in the streets, and just traveling around the island, different jobs I've got going around the island. So that's what I talk about in terms of research as well, and just giving that, bringing that to it. And of course, layering everything, all the breathing techniques. Before I go in, I do the breathing exercises, the mume, me, mama, she sells seashells, what to do today, all of that, right? And people think sometimes you get to a rehearsal for theater and you don't see people warming up because probably they've done it at home, right? But you have to do it. I do it. I do the breathing exercises. You have your water there. You take your breaks when necessary because you need them. You don't try and be a super person and be like, I'm gonna get through all of that, because your team isn't expecting that either. They're working with you, and sometimes also listening and having a little bit of flexibility, leaving some room for the discovery is also pretty good. Not having everything down pat. So I didn't arrive every time to studio knowing what every single voice was going to be. That did not happen. As much as I thought I did that, I would think I did that. That's not what happened when we got into studio. And often, my engineer would be like, do you want to play that for you? And then I asked, let me hear what she sounds like again, so I could match that and go over and just being vigilant and adding. People who are serious about theater know that it's a discipline, and there is discipline in theater and rigor, and you just have to bring that to bear. There's no way around that.
Awesome, thank you. This is for Kristen. You've been a podcaster for over 10 years. Did that make it easier or harder for you to narrate your own books?
Well, in addition to being a podcaster, I've been a host, and I've been a producer in public radio settings and in podcasting. And I will say this, that working in audio taught me to write in a way that I'm writing for the voice. And so I imagine that made it easier to actually read my books, because I am so accustomed to writing in a way that the words are supposed to be said out loud. Back when I was getting my MFA and I was doing more literary fiction, a lot of the sentences I wrote went on for like 5 lines, and those are really hard to read. And so, and I'm sure, Karl, you know more about this since, you just got done with like a literary fiction novel. But, not all words in all books are easy to read out loud. And I would say that since I wrote my books after 10 years of working in audio, it helped me a lot to just without even planning on it. I happened to be writing in a manner that was similar to how I write for the radio or for podcasts. So that was useful. But as far as actually the loneliness of it, sitting in that booth alone, most of my podcasts, I'm used to having someone else there. I'm used to playing off of someone's energy and chatting and improving. And one thing you can't do when you're reading an audiobook is improv and throw in an extra sentence there just to liven it up. You got to read the words that are on the page. And so if you're used to being on the radio, you can do that. If you're used to being in a podcast, you can do that. So that was a little tough, because it didn't happen a lot, but every once in a while my director would have to chime in and say, like, you can't say that, that's not on the page. And I would forget because it was my own words, and I wrote it myself. And normally when I write my own words, I do improvise quite a bit. So it didn't happen a lot, but it did happen a couple of times. So there's that also. So that's how my podcasting and my audiobook both helped and maybe didn't help each other.
That's really funny. I don't have experience narrating audiobooks, of course, but I when I was in school, I would read my papers out loud to be sure to catch any mistakes, and it's like similar stuff like that, where I would write for things that are supposed to be read silently, but not read aloud, and it's like, oh my gosh, this sentence is too long, or that's a big word. That is good on paper, but it's hard to say. So my next question is for Karl. gone over this a little bit, but or actually quite a lot of it. But how does your theater background inform your approach to narration, especially since theater is both a visual and auditory medium, whereas audiobooks are solely auditory?
Yeah, you realize very quickly that you do have to dial back and tone down. I think the first time I got out of the studio, you know, there's this feeling to animate and go on, and, and then it's like, no, the microphone is right here. No, don't. This is you stay right there and do everything. But it also, you know, then you hearken back to other times that you've been, you know, I was blessed to have been given the opportunity to read the news when I was working in Jamaica. So that came to bear, this sort of stillness, this idea that you are the vessel, you can't change anything, like you were saying, that this is the news and this is how you present it. You've got to look a certain way. So the whole idea of sitting in the upright position, getting your, you know, your posture together so that the breath flow is great. All of that came to bear. And with the theater, it is, you know, storytelling. That's what you do in the theater. You tell a story, and you're usually encompassing many different characters, whether they are animate, inanimate, human, or an animal. Whatever it is, you bring that to bear. So that was very useful. And I like to have fun with characters. I love telling stories, whether as an actor or as a writer. So I think that was the easy part. The hard part was sitting there and then applying the discipline and giving the color and correct shading to all the different characters while in this box with a microphone right in front of you. And I think I use paper, Kristen. I think I'm going to try the iPad next time, but I use paper. Yeah, but it was it was after a while. I think after the first session, you kind of get the hang of it, right? Because I hadn't done it in years. Wow, 12 years to be exact. So that's what I just kind of recalled. And everything just came back, like riding a bike, they say, and it went really well.
Wonderful, thank you. This is again for Kristen. What are the challenges of narrating a book that you've written yourself?
Challenge number one is seeing any moment that it's like, well, I could have said that better. Who wrote this nonsense? And then it's like, oh no, it was me. Oh God, I cannot believe this book is out in the world and I have that dumb, clumsy sentence in there. That happened a couple of times in each of the audiobooks recording sessions where I caught myself and I thought, oh, this could have been written a little bit better. And this author, oh God. So that happened a couple of times. But also on the flip side, there were some moments where I was so grateful that I got to do it as an audiobook, because there are certain things that I wrote out that I was able to animate and explain better. For example, in my book, So You Want to Start a Podcast, I was trying to write about certain microphone techniques. Like if you wander too far away from the mic, you sound like this. If you're, eating the microphone, you sound like this. And I was trying to describe it in writing. But when I was in the studio, I suddenly was able to act it all out, and it added a whole level of something else to it, which I really appreciated. And I also got to, in the book that I co-authored with Jolenta Greenberg, I got to do a little bit of what Karl does. There's like a little bit of acting. The book is a collection of essays. And Jolenta and I, her essays and mine kind of alternate back and forth. And some of the stories I like to think are pretty funny. Some are very sad, but we got to, kind of act out our stories in certain ways. And even though it was her chapter, mine, and we weren't normally together, there were certain parts where we got to be brought together in the audio studio that I was so grateful for. So for example, the book, when we were recording the opening of the book, How to Be Fine by Jolenta Greenberg, and then I would pop in and say, and Kristin Meinzer, like moments like that where we both got to be heard. Or the dedication of the book, which was, Jolenta said, for our listeners, our podcast listeners, for our listeners, and then I chimed in and I said, and for our husbands. And like there were moments like that where we got to both be involved in it. And it made me feel a special affinity for our writing that was so completely different than just when we were writing it out. So I'm really grateful we got to do it in audiobook form, because it gave me a new appreciation for the books. And, you know, even if at moments I thought, oh, this writing could have been better.
Yeah, thank you. So these last prepared questions I have are for Liz. First, how does someone join the Talking Book and Braille Center? And how does someone find out what books are available there?
To sign up, and we are for, if you live in New Jersey and you want the services, you contact TBBC. If you live in a different state, there's a library like ours who would provide similar services. Our application is on our webpage at the New Jersey State Library, and it's pretty simple. One page is where you put your name, your address, and basically check off what the qualifying condition is: blind, deaf-blind, low vision, physical, or reading disability. And then the next page is something that we call a certifying authority, where basically someone who's familiar with you and knows that, yes, this is blindness, low vision, they sign it certifying that you qualify for the library. So you don't have to provide us any medical records or doctor's notes or something. The doctor can sign an application, but it can be a nurse, it can be a professional librarian, because a professional librarian sees people coming in every day and can look and say, oh, yep, you know, this person qualifies for services. The only time it absolutely has to be a medical doctor or a doctor of osteopathy is for reading disabilities, because the idea is you can't look at somebody and say, oh, that person has dyslexia, the same way that you would look at somebody who has arthritis in their hands and so can no longer hold a book or turn the pages. And then basically just send that application in to us. Right now, unfortunately, we can't mail things back and forth because of what's going on with COVID-19. But what we can do is, if somebody signs up now, we're still accepting applications. All of our books, and not just the audiobooks, but also our Braille, is all available electronically that people can download, and that they can download onto a smartphone or a tablet, including the Braille, which always surprises people. There's been electronic Braille since the late 90s, I think it is. And so that they can still get the books that way. So we're still accepting applications, and we're looking forward to when we can start sending out the traditional books the way we used to, through the mail.
That's really cool. I didn't know that there was Braille, electronic Braille.
You can get, it's called a Braille Refreshable keyboard, and it's made up of these metal pins. Like, you know, the games that people would play where you're like, you know, you'd put your hand in that thing and all the pins would stick out or whatever. Think of that, where the pins move up and down, and they download the digital file, and those pins raise up to form the Braille cell. And so it's one line of, or sometimes 2 or 3 lines, you read your Braille. It's called a Refreshable Braille keyboard, because you get to the end of your sentence and then the next sentence pops up, and they can be as small as, you know, like basically like a keyboard or something like that. So it means that, you know, we've got like teens who they stop borrowing the print volumes because, let's say, you're reading, I'm now drawing a blank of a book somebody could be reading. I'm a bad librarian, but the Braille files would be like 4 or 5 volumes that look like these big 3-inch binders. I mean, it takes up a lot of room, but you download it and you're just walking around. The electronic file is on your iPad, and you've got this Refreshable Braille keyboard. It's the technology out there is really phenomenal. The only problem with the technology is it's really expensive. Like, those refreshable keyboards can be a couple of $1,000s. But right now, NLS is starting a pilot program where they're going to lend those refreshable keyboards to people, and we're going to be doing that hopefully soon in New Jersey, to increase the access to people for that.
Fantastic. Yeah, so those were all of my prepared questions, but now we can go ahead and start taking some questions from the audience. This first question is one that was asked by two people. Are you all readers of audiobooks? Do you find inspiration in them or in other types of spoken word recording? And related to that, someone asked, do you have a favorite audiobook? And if you do, why is it your favorite?
I love audiobooks. I was a little slow to them at first. I have to say, it's because I was not used to listening to fiction read to me, which is crazy because I have read so much fiction in my life. But so somebody gave me some advice. My friend Marilyn said, you know, what might be easier for you as someone who's used to listening to podcasts and the news, start listening to nonfiction first. Listen to Becoming by Michelle Obama. Listen to, Demi Moore's memoir or Jessica Simpson's even, listen to some memoirs first or, some nonfiction books. And you'll be surprised how much you'll get immersed in those. And that may be the first step for a lot of people. And they're just fantastic for me because I get really motion sick. And so I can't read, for example, when I'm on a trip or in a car. And one thing that I've also realized, like now I mostly listen to fiction audiobooks, by the way, not nonfiction. And one thing that I've really come to love about the fiction books that I listen to, which by the way, I want to shout out the Libby App. I love the Libby App and I use it all the time. Thank you, Libby App, for existing. One thing is that it really brings a story to life in a different kind of way that I didn't even realize. I just thought, oh, I'd rather read this book myself. But then once I heard, for example, Tom Hanks reading The Dutch House by Anne Patchett, it's like, I mean, who doesn't love Tom Hanks? He's like the nicest man in the whole world. Like, who doesn't want to hear him read you a story? And it gave me a whole other experience. And he brought the character to life in a way that I think would have, that maybe wouldn't have felt so emotional to me if it weren't for him reading the book to me. So yeah, that's a really long way of saying, yes, I listen to audiobooks. It did take me a while to get into the fiction ones, but once I did, I really enjoy them. And please, everyone, use the Libby app. The Libby app is amazing.
I listen to audiobooks. I have to say that with work from home, I kind of miss my hour commute each way because that's like the perfect amount of time for driving and listening to an audiobook because it's enough time to really get into something. So like I would be driving to work and I'd be listening to Becoming by Michelle Obama. And like by the end of the book, I thought, she's my best friend who's sitting in for the commute back and forth. Jessica Simpson, after listening to her book, it's like, I think about her and what she's done so differently now. But let's see, for my favorite, I'm going to have to go back to the, when I was on the Odyssey committee, the book that we picked. And that is, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, narrated by Bonnie Turpin. And it is a wonderful, wonderful book. And even if you've read it in print, read it in audio, because like Kristen was saying, the words are the same, but because of the performance, it's like, it's a whole different experience. It's almost like it's the same story, but told a whole different way because of hearing what's going on. And so I just think everyone should listen to that.
I was late to audiobooks because I am a slow reader. And I think also because I hate when the book is ending. So I would, I'm one of those readers, I latch on to my paper or hard copy. And especially when things are getting good and I actually close it and I see that I'm almost at the end, it's almost like I'll deny myself finishing it because I don't want it to end. I know it's very strange. I started out with audiobooks with the nonfiction. With things like wellness, because I felt like, let me zen out to something in my ear. And it was much like you, Elizabeth, with the riding the train, it was perfect. That I found, okay, that's the way to do it. Now I'm like, let me try some fiction. And I'm loving Joe Morton's voice on Ta-Nehisi Coates' Water Dancer. And one of the books that I'm now listening to that I read as in its hard copy form was The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, and I read it quite a while back, and I said, with this time, I said, let me have someone guide me through this, because I don't know if I can. I get really emotional when I'm reading something and everything is going on. So somehow the voice talking to me, I'm like, okay, I can deal with that. But I don't really have favorites. I tend to just kind of go with things now. If I was supposed to say my favorite book, it would be Go Tell It on the Mountain. And that happened because I was that young and the character in the book appealed to me. It's usually then, or Escape to Last Man Peak, which is by Jean DaCosta. My favorite books tend to be those that I read when I was coming up as a child, and it just kind of spoke to me differently. Now I'm just about what's in the moment. And in the moment for me is I'm revisiting Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow.
Yeah, if people don't mind me asking or answering as the moderator, I really enjoy audiobooks, which is part of why I put this event together. But actually, since Liz mentioned The Hate You Give, Bonnie Turpin is probably my favorite narrator. She's very prolific. She's read The Hate You Give. She's read The Sun Is Also a Star. She's read If Beale Street Could Talk, American Spy, just all sorts of stuff. And like, I remember having this experience because this was sort of newer when I was newer to audiobooks. I would I would pick something and then be like, oh, that's the same person who read this other book. And it's like, oh, that's the same person. And I just remember really liking that experience. And Libby actually does have for audiobooks setting where you can see, where you can choose books based on the narrator. So I've been making a lot of use of that as well. But as far as like a favorite audiobook, I actually really liked The Mother of Black Hollywood by Jennifer Lewis, because that is not only a literary experience, that is a performance that I feel like you could not get if you were just reading the text. Yeah, so some other audience questions are, this is for Karl. In These Ghosts Are Family, there are two especially strong male characters and several others too. And yet I thought it very much centered the female gaze. How did the male narrator approach this book, or approach this challenge, if he happens to share this view of the book?
How did I approach a challenge? Was that the question? Sorry, just repeat that last part.
Yes, how did you approach the challenge of, I guess, navigating the strong male presence of these characters while the overall tone was very much the female gaze?
That is an interesting question. I love it, because my response to that is, Jamaica is a society, no matter what the patriarchy is doing, the women are the cornerstone of everything. And I grew up with very strong women. Anyone who knows me and knows my female friends knows they're not to be messed with. I roll with hardcore women, and I tend to listen to them. And of course, growing up with a mom and a grandmother that kind of held court anywhere she went. So I think it comes from that. So it was in the upbringing. Most of the teachers that have left an impact on me have been women. So I think knowing that this was written by a woman, and knowing what, documenting a family tree, I kind of came to it with that temperament. Like, I need to hear what these ghosts are saying, and that feminine voice, which is something that I've been attuning my ear to over the course of my life. So that's how I kind of took it. Not sure if that answers what you want, but that was my approach. So it was one of a little bit of distance to listen, and then to enter.
And I guess I can ask, does that answer, to the person who asked that, does that answer your question? If she's still there. Yes, she said sure it's his truth. So that works. This is another question for you, Karl. You mentioned that it's helpful to leave room for the discovery. I assume the discovery of different character voices. Please explain.
So I would think, for instance, a character like Bernard, I won't say too much, but Bernard is considered the yard boy as described in the book. Voicing someone like that, you know, immediately I'm thinking of gardeners I've known, people who were probably brought to work for other people before they were adults, when they were young, and they've now grown up with this attitude of servitude and thinking that they need to always, you know, be prostrate and be thankful and be grateful for everything. And a character like that, I'd go in thinking, well, he's obviously angry. And then, so I'd have my way of doing Bernard, but then I can't separate Bernard from the other characters around him that causes him to act that way. And all of these characters are higher status and wield a little bit more power than he does. So I realized that once I started speaking in Bernard's voice, I would either pause a little bit more or lower my tone, and I would feel myself and my body almost shrinking at certain points. And that was a discovery. That's not something that I planned. So when I talk about leaving room for the discovery, it is about that. It's okay. You know that this is the character that you're reading, or these are the characters. Understanding when they are in the power spectrum, but not planning it out too much. You know the voice, but then what is that voice doing when it is angry, when it is hurt, when it is, and what are the levels of hurt and embarrassment that this character is feeling, and how you can just kind of let go and just let that happen. So I'm seeing somebody saying, who's Bernard? Bernard is in These Ghosts Are Family. Yes. So he's a character in Maisy Card's book, These Ghosts Are Family.
Yes, thank you. We do have one more question, and this is for everybody. What would be a dream book to narrate, even if someone else has already narrated it?
Ooh, so many. Homegoing, The Underground Railroad.
Homegoing, you would be so good at that. I love
anything by Edwidge Danticat. Like, you know.
Oh my gosh, it's so tough. There are so many beautiful books in the world. Like, how do you just choose one, right? I can't even imagine, you know. And I think for me, it doesn't matter what my dream is to narrate. Probably my accent will strike some people as the wrong thing to narrate that book. But oh, that's a tough one. Yeah. I can't narrate Michelle Obama's book better than she did.
The person who asked that question said that she loves your voice, so you should
give
yourself some credit.
Oh gosh, thanks there. I appreciate that a real bunch.
Yeah. So Kristen, you had a question for Karl?
Yeah, I just had a quick question, Karl, if you don't mind. How many times did you read Maisy's book before you went into the studio the first time? And did you like mark up the book kind of like you would a script beforehand? I'm so curious, since, you know, this is somebody else's work. It's not your own book.
So this is possibly going to lend itself to the whole thing about discovery. I read it once fully through. I read it one time fully through. I marked it all up. I made my little scribbles at the side because I wanted to also feel like I was in it. I'm not saying that that's an approach I would say everybody should do. You got to find your own thing. But I read it through once, and then I understood what was going on. And then, you know, made my notes with all the characters. And then I said, I'm going to go to the studio because I need to have fun with this. And I want to try and just discover what everybody's discovering, since I'm being tasked to lead the persons who are reading this audiobook to figure out what's going on. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. Only once.
Not saying I'm going to do that all the time. I think I took that risk also because once I flipped through, I'm just like, oh my God, I know that these are Jamaican people. And do it. If I had to do it again, I would have gone back over the Europeans a little bit more, especially that Scottish guy. So, you know. So, yeah.
Awesome. So let's see. I think there were more so other comments than questions. So someone said, I think this was back when we were talking about the favorite audiobooks. Someone said Born a Crime, and that changed this person's assumptions about audiobooks. And so now this person only listens to books after that experience. And then someone else said Woman of Troublesome Creek, and that's by Sandra Cisneros, I believe. Yeah, so that's cool. So if there are no other questions, I don't want to keep our panelists too long, but I did have, I guess I'll return to my slides for additional, to be able to show everybody's social media. Let me move to that one moment. Once again, I'm not sharing the right thing. Hold on. So these are everybody's social media accounts. Actually, I'll go back a little bit. And these are the books that were mentioned. So Kristen's were How to Be Fine, and So You Want to Start a Podcast. And Karl's was These Ghosts Are Family. And of course, Liz was joining us from the New Jersey State Library. And yeah, I'll just leave it up on the social media pages. But if anybody who's listening wants to, wants to enjoy audiobooks, I would highly suggest visiting elibrarynj.com on desktop or laptop, or with the Libby app on your mobile phone. And if you have any questions about how to use those resources, you can always visit us at npl.org or contact us at reference@npl.org, because we have a lot of ways of like showing how to use those tools. And I forgot to mention earlier that a lot of we do have materials available in languages other than English as well. So I think there was a question about non-English words. So I guess without further ado, we can probably go ahead and call it a wrap, I think, unless I'll check one more time. Were there any other questions? I can't see when I'm screen sharing, I think. All right, I think, oh wait, so, yeah, somebody just said thank you. All right.
Well, thank you. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you very much.